including members of the Council, to use social media, provided that this does not disturb the business of the meeting. I'd like to welcome members of the public in attendance to the County Council's budget meeting. It's a pleasure to have you here. I wanted to remind you that this meeting is being webcast live, although I have the right to suspend the filming if the need arises. I hope you find this an interesting meeting to watch. However, if there are any interruptions to the proceedings of the meeting, then under Standing Order 5 Stop 1, I have the right to ask people to stop any disruption and ultimately ask them to be removed from the Council. But I sincerely hope this does not come to this and that we can have a peaceful meeting and conduct the business of the Council as ever in a proper and efficient manner. So item 1, ladies and gentlemen, apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Marissa Heath, Mary Angel, Barbara Thompson, Andy MacLeod, Rose Thorne, Yvonne Lay, John Fury, Ernest Mallet, Kay Hammond and Charlotte Morley. Any other apologies? Thank you. Item 2, minutes on page 9 of the agenda. May I sign the minutes of the Council held on 10th December 2019 as a correct record of the meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, significant personal interests or prejudicial interests that members wish to make at this point? Thank you. Item 4, my announcements, which can be found in full in the agenda. So moving to item 5, 2020-21 final budget report and medium-term financial strategy. The papers for this item are included in the main agenda on page 25. Unless I receive any objections, I intend to take the recommendations as one recorded vote, and any member who is not entitled to vote on this item should withdraw, please. The arrangements for the debate on the budget are slightly different than those of our usual debates, as set out in Standing Orders 18K and L. And I call the Leader now to present his report. Leader.
Mr. Chairman, we come together for the first Council meeting of 2020, having laid out the most sensible, sustainable and ambitious budget proposals in Surrey for years. Our work as an organisation over the past 2 years has been tireless, and that hard work, leadership and innovative thinking from both Council officers and members throughout Surrey County Council must be acknowledged and praised. Around £500,000 every working day has been saved through greater efficiency and financial management over the last 2 years. Thanks to that work, we are able to present this balanced, forward-thinking budget, and that will deliver real progress and benefits for the people of Surrey, both now and in the future. Our finances are now on a stable footing and our transformation programme is well underway. Not only will we continue to deliver efficiencies for our budget, but as importantly, we will be improving outcomes for our residents. Quite simply, we are doing things better. Ofsted and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services have recognised this progress recently in our children's services and our fire services, and we're determined to keep raising the bar across all of our services. Our net revenue budget this year has slightly increased to a total of £968.4 million, which includes over 20 million relating to inflation and 55 million of service pressures, with 38 million of efficiencies identified largely through transformation. There is still uncertainty in future funding settlements from government and still growing pressures on many of our services. We are not complacent. We are looking to the future to identify challenges as well as opportunities as we move forward as a leading authority. We are proposing to increase council tax by 1.99% this year to support our sustainable funding base for future years and mitigate against the current uncertainty in medium and long-term local government funding. We will also use this increase in council tax revenue to deliver real tangible benefits for the council taxpayer in Surrey. Our capital investment programme will now enable us to start delivering our ambitious projects, making journeys around the county smoother, protecting homes and businesses, increasing education and care capacity, and supporting our local economy. I will speak about this in greater detail shortly. We will also be taking up the 2% increase in the adult social care precept proposed by central government to help manage the pressures on the adult social care budget. This is an area that needs a national solution, and now, with a more stable government in place, I hope we will see a long-term plan evolve to deal with those pressures in a more sustainable way. We want to play a part in developing those plans, as we feel that local government holds the key to many of the potential solutions. This will form a key part of our engagement with central government, as well as seeking long-term funding settlements for local government to enable us to plan our future vision with greater certainty. Our greatest area of day-to-day spending by far is on supporting our most vulnerable adults, our most vulnerable residents, the elderly, those with special education needs or disabilities, and children in care. We spend over £1 million every single day on adult social care and around £500,000 a day on looking after children. These are services that many Surrey residents may never have any direct experience of. And whilst it is our statutory responsibility, it is also our moral and civic duty to support those people with greatest need. Through greater integration with our health services and an approach that prioritises independence wherever possible, we are hopeful that the outcomes for these residents will improve considerably and provide a more sustainable future for the whole county. Mr. Chairman, Surrey is always considered to be an affluent county, with many of our residents enjoying a comfortable quality of life. However, there are also many pockets of deprivation, many people struggling with poor health, lack of opportunity, and without the advantage in life of others. It is our mission to reduce the inequality in Surrey, particularly in life expectancy, by targeting services and improving access to the many opportunities in this great county. We must deliver on our health and well-being strategy, whether that's through supporting lifestyle changes, a focus on preventing people falling into a chronic condition, whether that's for either physical or a mental illness, by much earlier intervention, and by delivering new models of care, including easier GP access and earlier screening. This mission cuts across all of our departments and services and is a key pillar of our organisation strategy and partnership working that came to the previous council meeting in December. Our environment, transport and infrastructure portfolio is perhaps the more universal area of our revenue spend, the thing that nearly all of our residents see and experience pretty much every day. It is this area that will focus on our greener future ambitions, rethinking the way we provide and use transport in the county and improve the way we maintain and enhance our countryside. This means a thorough review of our existing infrastructure and more particularly our public transport system. If we are to persuade our residents to get out of their vehicles, we must provide an alternative means of transport. That requires us to use public money to strengthen and enhance our bus and train services, and that is exactly what we shall do. Transformation funding will be used to support the development and delivery of much of this important work. We will continue to work with Extinction Rebellion and other environmental groups to help identify and use the best technology, invest in renewable energy, and work to change behaviour to ensure that Surrey is fit for the future. It is essential that we have the right level of capacity and resource in place within the organisation to deliver those ambitions that have been set out in our medium-term financial strategy. As members will have seen, the main areas of capital investment being around place-based projects such as highways improvement, flood alleviation and renewable energy sources. The ambitious capital programme outlined sets this budget apart from previous years. we're looking to invest hundreds of millions of pounds in a series of projects that will deliver real benefits for the people of Surrey, but also year-on-year efficiencies and resilience long into the future. An extra £92 million on improving our 3,000 miles of roads and pavements, £84 million on projects to protect the environment and help the climate emergency, including a solar farm, ultra-low emission vehicles and electrification of transport services, including buses and school transport. £270 million to protect over 30,000 homes and businesses from the risk of flooding, enhancing the environment, attracting investment and keeping residents safe. £100 million to regenerate high streets and invest in local communities. Funding that needs to support projects that our communities actually want, not projects that we think they need. We will genuinely engage with them in partnership to ensure that we collectively deliver real local initiatives. £31 million to provide 883 additional places for children with special education needs and disabilities, including a new SEND school. A further £70 million to provide additional school places and improve school facilities across the county. And £7 million in the first phase of a programme to deliver 725 specially adapted homes for elderly residents, to increase independence and hopefully reduce hospital admittance. This, alongside already identified capital investment, takes the total capital spend over the next 5 years to £1.4 billion and signals our absolute intent to deliver a better place for all Surrey residents. As already mentioned, a huge amount of work has gone into these budget proposals to ensure they're designed to help us deliver the key priorities of our organisation strategy for the next 5 years. This budget focuses on tackling Surrey's inequality, supporting independence, working in partnership, embracing Surrey's diversity, creating a greener future, supporting our local economy, delivering a more joined-up health and social care system, and leading a digital revolution in the county. We are very clear in our purpose, and we now have the tools to deliver it. Mr. Chairman, let me finish by again paying tribute to the tireless work that has gone into getting this council into a stable place financially. It is no mean feat, and it has provided a solid platform for us to improve lives, and I truly believe create a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So the budget is now open for debate, and I'll now call Mr. Darby to give a speech.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Leader. I will start with praise where it's due, some comment on particular services. I then have some words of caution, and we'll finish with some thoughts for the future. All of this in the context of the very great difficulties in which the local authority sector finds itself. We clearly now have greater stability than we did 2 years ago. We have the prospect of balance this financial year and a balanced budget this time, in both cases without the use of reserves. This is a welcome, necessary and essential improvement, reflecting the hard work of our officers and Chief Executive. In particular areas, our children's services are improving. While undoubtedly it is the job of opposition to call to account areas of concern or underperformance, it is also right to give credit where it is due. To highlight success loudly, we can rightly be proud of this. With the capital programme, I welcome the funding set aside for extra care homes, also children's homes. On that side, we need to put ourselves into a position to accelerate the programme, to be ever more ambitious, the requirement being to improve resident experience, at the same time bringing about much needed and genuine savings. We have been slow to reach this position. Provision of affordable key worker housing should also be on the agenda, working collaboratively with our borough and district partners, for instance on a strategic approach to Surrey-wide housing, and with them embracing the excellent work of the Surrey Place Ambition 2050, the right housing in the right places, listening to our residents and coordinating the essential infrastructure currently crumbling. The additional funding for highways and flood defences is also a welcome part of this. We do, however, need more detail on the £100 million mentioned by the leader set aside for the proposed Community Investment Fund. Scrutiny, perhaps not strictly a budget item, but one which allows us all working together to reflect and consider. Leader, I am grateful for the changes you have made, as also to those on all sides of the chamber who made those changes possible. This year has been one of bedding in. We can and must make these work cross-party for the benefit of residents. On a similar theme, it is our job as opposition to scrutinise your budget, not, in my view, to provide an alternative. It is on this basis that I make my comments. Now to my concerns and some context. Climate change. We have declared a climate emergency. There are some welcome proposals in the budget, but are they enough? What more do we need? Are we willing to spend more to address the issue? In my view, we need to question everything we do, to take a lead and to do everything we can, loudly and often, to engage with our partners and stakeholders. More to follow on this vital issue from our group. A case in point is Woking. I remain happy with the principle of moving from Kingston and with the concept of agile working. Both allow for the possibility of genuine efficiencies and sensible cost savings. In simple terms, the cost of running County Hall here in Kingston is too much. As always, attention to detail is essential. We will be watching that closely. For Surrey, despite a £20 million contingency in the budget, are we confident of the sums needed for adult social care? Aware of the cuts we are forced to make year on year, of the effect these will have on our resident experience? On outcomes, are we satisfied with the current state of our SEND services, with budget cuts forecast in the context of the known difficulties? Central government funding for our public health is the lowest per head in the country, clearly inadequate. The mental health side of this service faces a cut of £700,000. Can we truly say we are not facing what would amount to rationing of adult social care? This budget comes following years of failing services, of austerity, of hundreds of millions of pounds of cuts from central government funding, in turn forcing Surrey to impose significant reductions in services to residents. While it is true to say that our total budget increases by £40 million in 2020-21, more than £28 million comes from council tax increases, the balance from a one-off government payment. However welcome extra funding is from central government may be, it is not sufficient to deal with the underlying issues or cover anything other than the immediate short-term position. We must remind ourselves that the budget figures forecast a deficit of £160 million by 2024-25, that this year we are still budgeting for nearly £40 million of what we are told is efficiencies, in other words, cuts. The inevitable result of this is more cuts in years to come. The fairer funding review is outstanding. Local government figures are each year produced late. The long-promised review of and green paper on adult social care remains missing in inaction. The result of all this for Surrey residents is it is almost impossible for us to plan for the short term, let alone the medium or long term. We have also received significant criticism from SIPFA and more recently from our auditors. I will now quote from sections of the budget report. It is important to be clear that it will not be possible to offset all demand and pricing pressures indefinitely in the medium term without potentially more serious impacts or risk being in breach of statutory obligations. Any further reductions in a public health spend in Surrey could have very serious long-term impacts for Surrey residents. In respect of adult social care, net expenditure is still increasing at a rate that is not likely to be sustainable in future years. We are still no clearer on when, if at all, the social care green paper will be published, and so the future national plans for adult social care remain outstanding. And on public health, current funding changes forecast for Surrey County Council mean that it is very likely that further reductions in public health spending may be required. This could have very serious long-term impacts for Surrey residents. And now, Chairman, turning to my proposal. It is time we looked again at council tax. This requires legislation, but if we don't put this forward now, we just delay any change. We need 2 extra council tax bands at the top end, covering those already in the top band. Those living in the most expensive houses can afford to pay more. The amount need not be huge, but should rightly reflect both their ability to pay, to afford more, and those who struggle at the bottom end. If this raised, say, £3 million each year, there would be a choice to be made between protecting certain services and reducing council tax for those less able to afford it, in effect providing a more affordable cost of housing. To sum up, there is much to commend in this budget. As I have said, praise where it is due. We wish to continue to work with you collaboratively to achieve the best possible outcomes for our residents. There are, however, some significant issues for us around central government funding and a number of red flags on particular services where room for genuine efficiencies as opposed to cuts is extremely limited. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Mr. Botton.
Chairman, colleagues, I stand here with always a heavy heart because the responsibility that sits on our shoulders is a heavy one, not because we have just a challenging context in the whole of local government funding, not because there are not many things in this budget to celebrate, not because I have concerns about a structural issue in the budget, but because every day in my inbox and every day on the phone I hear the concerns of families whose children cannot get the package of care they need to meet their special needs. I hear of adults struggling to find the right package of care for their elderly residents, elderly family, and I struggle with the continued challenges to meet the needs of people with learning disabilities. The heavy burden that we carry implies that we must seek to identify where those weaknesses and challenges and vulnerabilities are and see if we can plug them. The excellent transformation programme which this Council has been going through has significant and energetic thought behind it, backed up by senior officers with a real vision and an understanding of how transformation should take place. What I'm not yet convinced of, however, Chairman, is that the transformation is yet reaching the front line in terms of the staff who have to make judgments about how services are apportioned. I could use the word rationing because I think we still are facing in the significant extra demands upon our services that staff on the front line are having to make rationing decisions which challenge. The optics of the capital investment programme, as well as the reality of it, offer potential huge significance and importance for the residents of Surrey. Dearest to my heart is the flood prevention scheme and the 270 million that looks to protect people from one of the worst disasters that a family can undergo. I hugely welcome all the integration that we're doing with health services, and I'm particularly delighted that our Director of Children's Services is also taking charge of the commissioning of health for children. That level of integration produces a huge impact which will make a significant difference. But if I look at the progress of transformation, I don't know how to choose a bellwether for whether the programme is working yet on the ground. I understand the ambition and I understand the direction, and I wholly applaud them. But if the project on spans and layers is generating a £500,000 cost pressure rather than a £500,000 saving, I have to ask myself if that is the bellwether, whether the transformation on the ground is yet sufficiently advanced for us to try to engineer significant savings out of services for our most vulnerable. So if I look, for instance, at the efficiencies that are proposed in special needs provision, at least 14 million, I know that my families, our families, still struggle to see an educational psychologist or a speech and language therapist. And one of the schools where I'm chair of governors has previously been able to afford to purchase the services of an educational psychologist 1 day a week and a speech and language therapist 1 day a week. But the pressure on school budgets has made that impossible. So I know that the children in that school will not any longer have the same access to those vital services to support their special needs. So I have a concern that those efficiencies in SEND provision are probably a year too early in terms of the level of transformation that will affect the front line. I'm concerned that older people's packages will be cut by 4.6 million. I'm concerned that learning disability and autism services will be cut by 4.6 million. And I'm concerned that an outstanding transformation project, which I praised last week at Cabinet in terms of our Section 75 reorganisation of mental health, but that reorganisation just beginning, just starting, needs to find 0.7 million in efficiency savings in this year. And I'm just wondering if that's quite right. On the optics of offering 100 million for a high street investment fund indicates a level of I won't say profligacy because that's rude, but a level of investment which may be more grandiose than it should be when these frontline cuts are having to be made. So a total of 12.3 million in adult social care. I wonder if that can truly be delivered. I hugely welcome the local learning fund of £1 million for which schools can bid to get packages of care to support children on their journeys, not necessarily to EHCPs, but hopefully to provide a package that prevents them getting to an EHCP. The task group, which I had the privilege of chairing, examined in forensic detail that programme of transformation in special needs. But I just wonder whether we're not a little premature in seeking to make those savings now. And finally, I do have a concern, Chairman, that we received a very powerful petition from the fire services. We've had an interim report which is extremely encouraging about our fire services. But should we really be making 1.5 million of efficiencies this year when we still need to secure the right level of manning and the right level of staffing, I beg your pardon, to secure the right response times? It just doesn't feel quite right. The heavy burden of responsibility upon us calls upon us to make sure that those most vulnerable, as the leader has said, are the most protected, the most cherished and the safest. I have a concern that our outstanding transformation programme is still got journey time to run, and that some of these efficiencies will have a negative impact on those about whom we care most. Chairman, there is much to celebrate and congratulate on this budget. Officers and members have worked extremely hard, and it's a hard and difficult build. That is why the moral challenge must always be the one we bring to it. The competence issue has substantially been addressed. Now it's the ethical one.
Thank you, Mr. Botton. Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think I read a different budget to Mr. Darby and Mr. Botton because I feel really optimistic, and I think this is a really, really good budget for the people of Surrey. I think it's a very clever balance. As the leader implied, there are a lot of unknowns coming down from central government about adult social care, fair funding, business rates, etc. So we have to be cautious to some extent, but we have some sensible level of reserves just in case things don't work out as well as we hope. I think also at this time of very low interest rates, it's extremely sensible to take advantage of that with a very large capital programme. And again, I think this is something to be commended, something that the people of Surrey will feel really very happy about that huge level of investment. There's extra money for highways. Personally, I've already put my bid in for Cranley for the Horizon programme. Straight away on receiving the email, so let's get on to it. And we had our private meeting of our local committee last Friday, and we learned about the extra money we're going to have locally for those smaller projects that we do locally. All good news for the people, residents of Surrey. And finally, the extra money for schools, 70 million, I think, capital investment. And I hope I think I'm correct in saying that's not just about more places, but those schools like Gleveland's in Cranley, which is still within the county system, I think there's still 45 schools that have not become academies or anything else like that. So these are some of the schools that have been loyal to the county. They need investment. They need simple things like double glazing and better roofs, which will all add to the reduction in CO2 emissions if we get those things right. So I'm putting my bid in early there for Cleveland's. So I think this is a really good news budget, and let's have the tempo up a bit and not a rather depressing speeches from the opposition. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Spence.
Thank you. I mean, the budget has been formulated through the blue prism alone, and as such, it is a brighter and more vibrant wash of blue than you have achieved before, and that is what we are commending you for. But because it wasn't developed by a cabinet of all the talents, as was offered, the yellow bits, the red bits, the green bits, and the independent bits are underdeveloped. So as a Farnham Residents Councillor, I may sound parochial, but as a Farnham Residents Councillor, to some extent, that's what I'm elected to be. In relation to our town, the major things that are happening there, Brightwells, the investment that we have needs to be examined and ensure that that development succeeds. And as Surrey is the major player in that, I am concerned that it's not a high enough priority in this budget, apparently, to examine that investment in detail to see where we're at now, nor can I say anywhere a proposal to audit our investment that I have asked for at the Audit Committee and elsewhere. In relation to traffic and air pollution in Farnham, we're simply not getting to grips with this. I can't see again any specific investment identified in this budget to relieve the traffic in the centre of Farnham, to introduce a 20-mile-an-hour zone in the town centre, to ban trucks over 7.5 tonnes in the centre and down Folly Hill and the Upper Hill Road, and to ensure the section between the borough of the borough between Castle Street and the Royal Deer Junction is addressed, and money committed to address it before the Brightwells and the Woolmead developments come online. Now, I accept, Tim, that you as leader and Colin Camp as deputy leader are sincere about these issues, but in relation to the air pollution, Jeremy Hunt, our MP, sought an action plan by the end of January, and it's not clear such an action plan or a budget, for it exists in the documents that I've seen. So as such, it may be parochial, but until such times as those things are included in the budget, I cannot support it, because I think if we don't have those local issues to the fore, which are very, very important to Farnham, then the budget as a whole, whilst improved, still is flawed.
Thank you, Mr. Spence. Mrs. Turner-Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to commend this budget. It's a very confident and practical budget. It's anchored in the needs and is very reflective of the immediate requirements of our communities. I would particularly like to draw your attention to the significant capital investment in our public rights-of-way. Just over £3 million to enable additional access and transport avoidance, really, is what we're trying to achieve here, enabling people to move around the county and not generate emissions. There's approximately 3,000 miles of our network. It's 43% of the highways network in Surrey. There are approximately 12,000 finger posts which last up to 10 years but require constant repair and replacement. The Rights of Way Department receive 20 reports a day, up to 150 per week from members of the public. These reports include overgrown vegetation, nuisance and encroachment, and our priorities are public safety and ensuring the access is not prevented to this extensive network. The capital funding will enable an additional 500 miles of path to be brought back into use, and this will include bridge repairs and an extensive vegetation clearance programme, and replacement posts with direction and distance information to encourage all of our residents to enjoy travelling via a pleasant alternative to the public highway. So I would encourage all residents to look out for improvements from the spring and to continue to report any issues that will be addressed through this programme. In support of this investment, we absolutely thank the many volunteers who assist with vegetation clearance and finger post replacement schemes across the network. £500 pays for a volunteer to be trained to support this service. This is a renaissance of our off-road routes, and we absolutely encourage all to use them and encourage you to enjoy our beautiful countryside in Surrey. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having scrutinised the budget on the Resources and Performance Committee over the past few weeks, we should commend it as both ambitious and realistic. While it would have been helpful to have had more time to review such a large and detailed project, a December general election can have unexpected consequences, and in spite of the short time frame, the select committees were very thorough in their examination of the areas of the budget for which they were responsible. Mr. Few, Mr. Whitehouse and their team have produced a budget that does exactly what it's supposed to do. It serves our county's residents, but more than that, it does so without using reserves. If there's a reason for confidence, it's a belief of our officers that our budget is feasible and deliverable. Of course there are risks. Transition at the pace and scale we're attempting may be ambitious and necessary, but there is always risk. The SEN funding gap is widening year on year, a gift from Westminster that keeps on giving. And hopefully there will be a resolution to the Eco Park that will not be a further financial burden on our finances. However, we have contingencies and reserves that will cushion us in the worst case. We're not out of the woods, but this budget is a statement of intent that we can and will deliver on our vision. There may be political reasons why some across the floor will not vote for it. Perhaps some of our colleagues in other parties would prefer to advance other priorities. But as a financially sustainable and resilient budget, there is every reason why we should vote for it.
Thank you. Mr. Essex.
Thank you. I won't be voting for this budget because I think there is still a huge wasted opportunity here to change Surrey for the better, and the budget isn't all clear about what money will be spent on. We're in a climate emergency, but there are apparently limited funds allocated to deal with it over the next year. While spending on roads is a priority, money for more bus routes is absent. Funds to provide genuinely affordable homes are not allocated. Public health spending is being cut again. Why are we prepared to spend millions more on roads, yet not a penny more on public health? There is too little too late in the budget to deal with the climate emergency, which has to be a guiding principle for everything we do as a local authority. So this budget, it looks like a blank chequebook. It still has millions of pounds undefined. I asked for a breakdown about the £5 million for feasibility studies next year. What will it be spent on? Is it a secret or is there no plan? Similarly, £68 million of other pipeline projects due next year. For what? We can't tell you. Yet this is nearly twice the total savings imposed across the whole council. And there is no mention of the promised £84 million of greener futures, the council's climate emergency plan in the budget. Are there plans to spend more than a fraction of this next year? We don't know. We've doubled our reserves to over £40 million now. So why not spend £1 million of that on new posts across the council to start mainstreaming action on climate change now? And the budget doesn't, while the budget commits to nearly £200 million in new road maintenance and road investments to drive growth, when the scrutiny committee asked about extra money for new bus routes, critical for Surrey to deal with climate change, we were told no. A question whether we could improve how we would spend money better on roads compared to the 15 counties we benchmark against. We're currently second most expensive in cost per mile and mid-table for cost per mile travelled. So why not save money there? We need to be better at repairing potholes, better at patching pavements, and invest in road safety improvements to serve walking, cycling, safe routes to schools, not just more money into the same resurfacing plans. Meanwhile, our spending on public health is being cut again. So we will spend even less improving Surrey's sexual health, stopping smoking, dealing with obesity, encouraging healthier living, the lowest, we understand, in the UK. So why spend millions more on roads, yet not a penny more on public health? I will not sign up to over £1 billion in spending plans that are not clear. We need to set out the actions needed to address the climate emergency. We need extra staff across the council dedicated to address it. And we need to plan investments and not do further cuts to care packages, which our own analysis says we'll not be able to mitigate and minimise all of the negative impacts. This budget simply isn't good enough, and we need to be transparent with the people of Surrey as to what we are planning to spend our money on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. We have several things going in our favour in this budget. The government's given us more money than expected, although a big chunk will be coming from our ability to raise a supplementary 2% in council tax for adult social care. But this does mean the savings target are a little more muted than expected. Now, I do call them savings and not efficiencies, because frankly that's what we are, and we should recognise them as such. The government's commitment to the funding of local government and social care has been pushed down the road for yet a further year at least. We know the reasons why, general election, Brexit, etc., but we are, in my view, we really just have to focus on this current year. We're finishing this year having met savings targets and not using the 10 million contingency set up. And there's another 10 million coming in next year, and we do actually have in our earmark reserve some 30 million in a budget equalisation reserve. The transformation projects seem to be delivering for us, and they will need to deliver in the coming year. The special mention for the strength-based commissioning in adult care, which delivered for us last year and this year. So far, so good, but the leader won't be relying on our votes to get this budget through, so I will set out two particular areas of concern. Number one is SEND. Earlier this week, Chairman, I met with chairs of governors of 4 local primary schools. Discussion focused on the continual problem with the Children's Service to properly deal with EHCP assessments on a timely basis and with the right funding, and then to deliver the right settings for the education of the relevant children. One might think this is a ploy to save money and push back onto school budgets. SEN is one of the main areas where the Council has failed to meet the current year's targets, and we're planning a further 5 million saving in the coming year. Is this realistic? On top of this, we are funding this from the high needs block, and even so, we'll end up 50 million overspent by the end of the coming year. Will the Department for Education ever pay this money back? The auditors will have a difficult job signing off the accounts this year. My second area of concern is the transition for people with learning disability and autism entering the adult care arrangements. Each and every year we have a cost pressure of some 5 million. I'm sceptical if this can be fully offset, which is this budget proposes, by the care package savings intended. Chairman, time does not permit me to say much more except to express continuing concerns at the risk present in the Eco Park project, and also to regret the time we have taken to get our property team up to strength. A key service to getting many of our savings targets delivered and implementing our ambitious capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Barton.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just really concerned because I haven't really heard anything in the budget about how we're really going to address the climate change emergency. There's no mention of the extra training of officers, the more resources that we need. If we're really going to achieve the carbon reductions we need by 2050, we've got to have a completely cultural shift in this organisation. It's a paradigm shift. It's got to be pretty dramatic. And I'm really concerned that we haven't actually, there's no really mention of what that will mean. For example, we want to support greener travel, but we don't have any cycling officers anymore. The highways team need a whole retraining of how they see greener travel. I speak in my community to the highways team about prioritising cycling, and if they just aren't in that space, and I'm really concerned that otherwise our promises to a greener future is basically just a bit of a greenwash. I had another question. Does the leader agree with me that the Council should lead by example in the reduction of its carbon footprint, consistent with its recent climate change declaration? And so could the leader please confirm that the Executive will negotiate with the landlord of Midas House, Woking, an appropriate financial contribution to the large investment that will be needed to bring Midas House up from its currently very low energy rating of E to a more acceptable standard consistent with the Council's stated climate change goals? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't actually going to speak, but there's been a couple of comments that was made. One particularly about rights of way. I've got a particular issue in my division, and in fact Surrey's trying to close it. So I think to be told, we're opening all the doors is a little bit rich. So I think people need to look into rights of way specifically. I think also this is a reasonable budget. I accept that. But I think the members of the public again. A councillor opposite mentioned the investment that we're going to be spending. Let's hope it's in the right place and let's hope it's used in the correct way. Because our borrowing is going to double in 2 years, and over 5 years is going to be virtually 1 billion. Now, the point was made that's a cheap rate. OK, but members of the public need to know that Surrey is borrowing those sorts of sums to deliver the services that it wants to. Let's just hope that money is being put in the right place in the right way. Another big issue, and it's already been touched on, so I don't want to go over past comments. The SEN one, I think Nick's dealt with that very, very well. But the point about Midas House, we need to be quite clear that we're going there for the right reasons, in the right way, and the budget aspect of that is good. It leads us to want to know what is happening with where we're standing now. And what that focus, moving from Kingston to Woking, is actually going to mean financially. And we still don't know, and it's not really mentioned in the budget. I think I'll leave it there, because I wasn't actually going to speak. But I think those issues, certainly my residents, are very, very concerned about. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Kington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've never voted for a Surrey County Council budget in this chamber since I was first elected in 2009. Those budgets were tabled at every single budget meeting without any meaningful scrutiny and consisted of a series of service budget envelopes which we were required to endorse with the promise that the Cabinet would tell us what we voted for 6 weeks later. That was a failure of leadership, financial leadership, but all of those members opposite criticise us for failing to follow your disastrous financial lead, and it took hugely critical reports from SIPFA and Grant Thornton to make the members opposite change the financial regime, but of course by then a huge amount of damage had been done. Mr. Chairman, there were Conservative budgets and Conservative failures, but it's been our residents who paid the price in terms of service failings, in adult social care, children's services, fire services and much more. However, in 2020 we at last have a system in place that is heading in the right direction towards planning ahead, openness, transparency, starting to provide proper scrutiny and effective financial management. We're not there yet, as Councillor Nick Darby has set out, and there are still too many areas there have been decisions being taken that have not been properly scrutinised, and there's more to be done yet. And of course it won't surprise anyone in this chamber if I mention top officer pay. While most budgets are being cut, held or increased in a slow upward trajectory, this council spend on top pay is increasing and increasing rapidly. Last May, senior pay amounted to just over 5 million. Today it's 5.4 million and rising. Last May, it was anticipated that 21 senior officer posts would be evaluated with a pay range including 100,000 per annum, but today it's actually 24. I have been part of the appointment process, and I'm fully aware that the Council has appointed a large number of experienced and well-qualified officers to take this Council forward. But that has come at a price, and our residents need to know that it is not Council taxpayers' money that we just give out and forget about. So there has to be an annual opportunity for members to monitor that budget heading and to ensure the expenditure is providing value for money. Unfortunately, the leader of this council continues to block that monitoring. And without that scrutiny being in place, and alongside the points already raised by my Residents' Association and independent councillor colleagues, I again cannot support this budget today.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, unlike Mr. Kington, I welcome this budget. I note that Mr. Essex talks about public health cuts. Well, I might refer, Mr. Chairman, you and our members here to page 53 of our papers and to table 5. Here it says that the public health budget for 2019-20 was 30.2 million, and indeed it's the same amount for 2021. Not a cut, as far as I can see, unless my arithmetic is flawed. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, the Children, Families, Lifelong Learning and Culture budget is up. The Adult Social Care budget is up for next year. The budget for environment, transport and infrastructure is up. The budget for transformation, partnerships and prosperity is up. And the overall expenditure is up by 40 million. This is a remarkable budget, the like of which I haven't seen in the last 10 years in this council chamber. Together with a capital expenditure up by 1.4 billion over the next 5 years, I think this is a bold and optimistic budget, and I welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This council takes climate change extremely seriously, and I'm really concerned when members believe we don't. We are. That is why the leader in the budget is 84 million for climate change related issues. Some of that will be things like solar farms, electric vehicles and ultra-low buses. But we would be wrong today to be announcing what we're going to do because we're consulting. Yes, members, we're going to schools to speak to our young adults. We are going to businesses. We have got focus groups. We've gone to the academic world. We are finding out what we need to do in Surrey. Leeds are benchmarking our current performance. And I'm pleased to confirm by April we will be announcing our climate strategy. And that will then give us an opportunity to start to deliver the many things we want to deliver. But first of all, we need to find out exactly what we need to do. And that's exactly what we will do. And we will deliver. It will include things like cycle. It will include improved buses. So give us a chance. Let's get it right. Don't let's just run off and do it quickly without thinking about it. This council will do it properly, members. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Ramsdale.
Thank you, Chairman. I find myself agreeing with a lot of being said, in particular the words of Councillor Martin. So much is so good, I find it amazing that there's so many voices of criticism. I would, though, because I wasn't going to speak, but pick up on the points about Farnham. Councillor Spencer, I'd really like to thank you for raising your concerns on this, but I do feel yet again you seem to have got half the story and not finished it. So for the sake of my colleagues, all of us in the room and the gallery, because I know many of them are from the Farnham area concerned about these things, let me finish it. Yes, Air quality in Farnham needs action. That the locations in Farnham are the worst in Waverley, and I suspect are amongst the worst in Surrey altogether. But the budget is about funding, and have we got the funds to handle it? And the answer is yes. And they didn't need to be spelt out, because much of it is things that are already available, or the funds are sat there. Key part about improving air quality is the condition of our roads, in particular some of those narrow roads, difficult roads in the town centre of Farnham. And we've both travelled them, indeed sometimes even together. The 20-mile-per-hour scheme initiatives, well, we've achieved one of those in Rowledge. The funds was available for that. That's the Rowledge part of Farnham. Regarding 20 miles per hour limits and the 7.5 tonne limit on vehicles in the centre of Farnham, well, we've got a discussion happening at our local committee on the 28th of this month, thanks largely to Councillor Young taking that initiative to set that meeting up. I don't believe there's a lot of extra funds needed for those. You're right, there's an initial scheme at the borough to be the first part of the Farnham Town Centre plan. And that was a part of the £80,000 that we helped identify at Waverley and here and the Town Council to fund. And as you know from the meeting we had only last Friday, we don't know where that money's gone. This isn't a question of councils being good enough and strong enough to identify more funds for these activities. It's about making sure that they're spent on the right things. Like you, I'm looking forward to hearing where that money is. It's something to do with a project team called Regenco and something to do with the Borough Council. But I'm waiting to hear more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsdale. So that's a good debate, and I call the leader to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps last year I think I stood here and said I hope that this year, where there will be greater consensus over the budget. And it's disappointing that there isn't, but perhaps understandable. But there are some things, I have to say, that just don't ring true. To Chris Botton's words about the heavy responsibility that we bear, I feel that, I have to say, more than anybody. You know, this is a council that is having to transform itself, it's having to deliver services at the same time within a confined budget, and it is very, very difficult to balance those demands. I will deal with some of the points as we go through. I'm disappointed perhaps with Jonathan Estes' sort of grandstanding around here. What is more important? Is it dealing with the climate emergency, or is it dealing with vulnerable residents? They're both hugely important, but we cannot and will not ignore our vulnerable residents whilst we whilst we work out what we're going to do in terms of the climate emergency, which this council has acknowledged, I acknowledge, and which we are doing all that we can to address. I think that, as Mike Goodman has said, there will be a strategy in April. The select committees will input that. There's been a working group, there's a reference group. Everybody has the opportunity to feed into this. It is quite right, as Mike says, that there is no defined budget for some of these areas, because it is for members of this council to work out, with advice and support, where best to put that money. We'd have been criticised if we had put a line-by-line item in terms of how we spend it. So please, recognise £84 million has gone into this budget to deal with tackling climate emergency, and please contribute to the work of the select committees and with the cabinet member, and help us create in April a proper, workable, deliverable strategy. On SEND and mental health, which has come up a few times, and despite what Nick Harrison says, this is not about cuts. Efficiencies is a very different approach. I would ask you all to just remind yourself of the transformation programmes here. This is about doing things in a different way. Chris Bolton says about what is the bellwether for this. The bellwether, the test of whether we're successful in this is measuring the outcomes at the end of the day. That is the only thing that matters. And what will be different for residents in SEND transformation? Just because you put money in, and put more money in, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going in the right areas. I could make that argument in relation to the NHS and all the additional funding that's going in. Largely that's going towards the acute hospitals rather than perhaps into primary care and to early screening, which is where it should be, and into prevention, early intervention. The money that the SEND transformation programme, talks about, it talks about preventing, about early intervention, about supporting children to have a more independent life, which is what they will need through transition and into adulthood. To enable them to have greater access to more vocational opportunities. We need to be able to provide facilities nearer to home so that these children aren't travelling so far, not least of all because we're spending £33.5 million taking those children from their homes to those schools. We need more local facilities. That's better for them to be part of the community. It's better for them to be in mainstream education and so on. We need to educate the families more about how they can help, what we can do to help and give them better information, better tools and so on. So this isn't about cuts or anything like that. This is about looking at how we deliver those SEND services. We know that we are not anywhere near where we need to be in terms of our SEND delivery. Dave Hill, has had a major task on his hands to deal with general social care for children, and he's doing that, has done that. And I hope that when those people that value independent verification, whether that's SIPFA or the fire inspector at Ofsted, I hope that we will see, I'm sure that we will see real recognition, as we have done from Ofsted, that there's been major improvements. SEND is an absolute area for focus. We are now in the process of creating a new front door, a single point of access, so that all of the everybody can come together in one place and work out what is the best route for that child. So the numbers are the numbers. There is transformation funding going in, actually, which will help deliver some of those efficiencies. But there is a fundamental review in the way in which SEND is operating. And I can assure you that there will be no question of not giving that area the funding that it needs to carry it through the transformation to where we need to be in terms of those vastly improved outcomes. On to Nick Darby's point about central government funding, there is a debate in the House of Commons tomorrow on the fair funding review. We contributed to that last year. We had a meeting with Rishi Sunak, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. One of his political advisors at the time was Claire Coutinho, who is now the Member of Parliament for East Surrey, and is very closely involved in this ongoing piece of work. There is no doubt that the last 11 Surrey MPs and the current 11 Surrey MPs are all too aware of our need and desire, along with everybody else, to have certainty and proper funding. The funding review that the CC and the County Council networks supported and helped drive would, in general terms, if it were to be delivered in the way that was proposed, would be a positive for Surrey County Council. We will continue to lobby long and hard to get the money that we need. I'm seeing Jeremy Hunt next week on Valentine's Day, and as you may have seen, he is now the chairman of the Select Committee, and he will be driving forward some of the work around the review of adult social care and the funding of that. So we have a very good opportunity to lobby him as well. One of the things I did raise with the Chief Executive, and I think we will think about, is whether we invite residents to make voluntary additional contributions to council tax. That was a policy that I think Nicky Aitken, the new Member of Parliament for Westminster and the City of London, introduced when she was the leader of Westminster, and it worked. So whilst we continue to, I agree with you that there needs to be a review of council tax bands and also a review of business rates, and I'm imagining that as part of all of the general future funding of local government, that will be on the government's agenda. But there is nothing to stop this council asking people to make more contributions to council tax if they so wish, and I'm sure that there are some residents here that would be very happy to do that. I think then, in terms of, I've covered most of the stuff I think that Chris Bolton has mentioned. On the High Street Fund, let's just be clear on that. This is a capital fund. This is not subsidising or taking money away from revenue from our frontline services. It is a capital fund. I have said, and we will have, a all-member workshop in the near future, the very near future, to start to look at what that fund should be used for. This isn't about writing out massive cheques of our residents' money. This is about looking at projects that will enhance and support and promote our communities. And there will be a whole range of subjects and projects that people want. But those projects won't be dictated from here. Those will be projects that you will get, you will engage with your communities, and they will tell you what they want, whether those are buildings or investment in some sort of local community activities and so on. So we're not, the good thing is we're having the conversation about the ability to do that. We are a public authority, and it is our responsibility to look after and to invest in our communities. So we will have shortly a date for that all-member workshop. And we will see where we get to. But I have to say, I think that is a really positive, event. I think Denise Turner-Stewart has dealt with the fire service. That isn't about cuts. There's some additional revenue that's coming in from the collaborative service that we're doing with West Sussex and so on, which looks as if it's actually a cut, but actually some of that 1.6 million is, in fact, additional revenue. As for Farnham, so I had this conversation with Colin Kemp, and I are seeing Jeremy Hunt next week on that subject as well. I am disappointed that this has not progressed further. I sat at that summit. I made a commitment that this council would put the necessary resource behind getting to a point where there was a plan but that plan, in terms of the preferred options around the pedestrianisation or otherwise the Farnham Town Centre, is with Waverley Borough Council. Waverley Borough Council said that they would produce that, and they haven't. So there's no point criticising us, and I gather there will be some criticism in the Farnham Herald, which I made a star appearance in, I gather, the other day as well. So what I'm going to do is we are going to take control of this project. At the end of the day, it is unacceptable. The levels of pollution in Farnham are absolutely unacceptable. That isn't the only place in the county. We will put the officer time behind this. We will come up with some proposals, and we will consult the public on those. I think then, just on Jonathan Essex's point about there is additional funding going into buses. I have made it very clear. Anybody that is regularly in the cabinet room or any of the senior officers are bored of hearing me about putting on additional bus routes. That has to be a starting point. If we are going to get people out of their cars, we have got to provide a sustainable alternative public transport system, and that starts with buses. And it's not just about air pollution, it is also addresses congestion, it addresses isolation. Mary Lewis, 2 or 3 years before, however long it is ago, set up the Chatter Bus. It's a little mini bus that goes around Cobham and Weybridge and so on. And it isn't just about taking people shopping, it's a good opportunity for people to chat and to get out of their houses and so on. So we will be investing more money in public transport system. We are working on that at the moment. As you know, there is a Rethinking Transport project that is absolutely focused on it. That we need to recognise that will be public money that we will need to use, our residents' money, to support that. But I would hope, I'm sure, that they will be they will be supportive of it. And then, when we've done that, when you can have effectively the equivalent of a transport for Surrey, so you can move seamlessly from your front door where you walk or cycle, or you get a bus to a train station or whatever, but you can move around this county seamlessly. That is the plan, and that is where the investment absolutely will go. I think I think the rest of the points, hopefully I have picked up. In relation to Nicky Barton's point, yes, we are going to make sure that we improve the efficiency of Midas House. I would ask all of you whether you've actually had energy efficiency ratings done for your own home. You could start by doing that. And do whatever work is necessary to improve it. We will do that with Midas House, and there are plans in hand. I think then the rest of the points I think are covered. You know, this is, you know, it is a difficult balance to be had, and we know that we are having to make efficiency. We are having to balance our books. We have done that last year, this year, and next year. That is essential, without damaging the delivery of those services, and that is not easy. You know, we have, though, I think, are able to demonstrate that we are using the money more appropriately. That the outcomes for our residents are beginning to improve. We are getting recognition from CIPFA, from the Fire Inspectorate, from Ofsted. That isn't the key thing here. That's not, that's important, but it's not actually the real focus. The real focus is on doing the best, genuinely trying to do the best for our residents. And I would hope that members, when you come to vote, recognise that we have a statutory responsibility here to pass a budget. Also, the budget is a living document. It isn't. The budget doesn't stop after the debate, in 10 minutes' time. It goes through the year. You have the monthly monitoring budget material. The select committees can call in at any time during the year any aspect of this budget. And we will, in a planned way, in any event, start to look in detail at some of the areas that we have talked about. But please don't suggest that there's lack of transparency in what's going on. The transformation programme, the 24 transformation programmes, are the work plan for this council over the next 12 months. That is what the select committees should be doing. All of those transformation plans carry with them a financial consequence or benefit or cost. So use those appropriately and properly as a way of tracking this budget, so that next year when we come back, perhaps we will have a unanimous vote in support.
Thank you, Leader. So let's move to the detailed recommendations, which include the council tax precept proposals. And as I stated right at the start of the meeting, I intend to take the recommendations as one recorded vote. So I invite Michael Coughlin to take the recorded vote now, please, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Azad? Mrs. Barton? Mr. Beckett? Mr. Benison?
For.
Miss Boot? Mr. Bottom? Mrs. Bowes? Mrs. Bramhall? Mr. Brett Warburton? Mr. Carrasco? Dr. Chapman? For. Mrs. Clack? Mr. Cooksey? Mrs. Curran? Mr. Darby? Mr. Deach? Mr. Essex?
Against.
Mr. Robert Evans?
Against.
Mr. Tim Evans?
For.
Mr. Few?
For.
Mr. Forster? Against. Mr. Furness? For. Mr. Gardner? For. Mr. Goodman? For. Mr. Goodwin?
Against.
Mrs. Goodwin?
Against.
Miss Griffiths? For. Dr. Grant Duff? Mr. Gulassi?
For.
Mr. Hall?
For.
Mr. Harmer?
For.
Mr. Harris?
For.
Mr. Harrison?
Abstain.
Mr. Hawkins?
For.
Mr. Hussain?
For.
Mrs. Isles? Mr. Islam?
For.
Mr. Kemp?
For.
Mr. Kington?
Abstain.
Mr. Knight?
For.
Rachel I. Lake? Mr. Lee?
Against.
Mr. Lewis? Mrs. Lewis? My apologies. Mr. McIntosh. Mr. Mansfield. Mr. Martin. Mrs. Mason. Mrs. Mooney. Mrs. Mosley. Mrs. Mountain. Mrs. Muir. Mr. Newty. Mr. Oliver. Mr. O'Reilly. Dr. Povey. Mr. Ramsdale. Mrs. Rivers. Mrs. Rush. Mr. Samuels. Mr. Spence. Mrs. Steeds. Dr. Zanto. Mr. Taylor. Mr. Townsend. Miss Turner-Stewart. Mr. Walsh. Mrs. Watson. Mrs. White. Mr. Witham. And finally, Mrs. Young. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is 49 for, 12 against and 8 abstentions. So that is passed. Thank you. Moving to item 6, members' question time. Notice of 5 questions, 5 minutes per question for supplementary questions. These must be framed as questions, please, not statements, and be relevant to the original question. Question time will be limited to 45 minutes, at which point I will finish the question we're on and close the item. If any questions are not covered during the 45 minutes, a written answer has been tabled, and members can, of course, follow up with the relevant Cabinet member outside the meeting. As this is the budget meeting, there are no Cabinet member updates at this meeting. So, question 1, Mrs. Watson, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for his response, and I'd like to ask, are you aware that many Surrey residents are pleased that the County Council declared a climate emergency last July, but are disappointed with the lack of urgency in the implementation? Can you let me know how many trees have been planted by the County Council since the launch of its tree planting initiative? Was it just the one tree planted by the leader of the Council at the launch? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goodman.
Thank you. This question was about what's happened so far. May I request, when you come back in April with the plan going forward, that might include setting out what will be done within this future financial year. So, as well as making plans, we know what we're planning to complete by the end of March.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman.
Thank you, and thank you for the question and the supplementary. I do not accept that this council lacks any urgency. You'll be the first to criticise us if we'd have gone ahead, developed the strategy last year without consulting, started spending money without understanding where we need to spend the money. As I said earlier, this council will do it properly. We are consulting residents, and I speak to residents. We're going to schools. We're going to business tonight and giving a talk on climate change at a business meeting with 150 businesses. We are talking to those people first because we want their views before we decide what to do. So this council is taking urgency, and I can tell you we are also in consultation with the government. We have been talking to the government, and officers are going to LF on Friday talking about low emission buses and EV points. This council are very proactive in getting this right. As for the trees, I cannot give you an exact figure. What I can tell you is by the 1st of October, which will be the year, we will then announce exactly how many we've planted. What we are doing, we are monitoring all the trees that are planted throughout the borough. What I can announce that we are having on the first week in March a tree week for Surrey. Surrey are going to have their own tree week where we're going to be planting several thousand trees. And we're getting the MPs to plant a tree. And also, for some of the older people here, Brian May is also going to plant a tree for Surrey. So yes, we are being proactive, we're showing urgency, and this council will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 2, Mr. Robert Evans.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the Cabinet Member for his response and for taking time out to have discussion with me about this. But would you agree with me that there are still too many cases where roads seem to get dug up in close succession, perhaps by the utilities, and instances where you can tell the borough boundary with London, not so much by the road signs, but by the change in the surface of the road, and that there needs to be continued liaison so that it's not done piecemeal? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we do agree that some of the reinstatement by utility companies isn't as good as it could be. That is why we are pursuing lane rental, which will be coming before this Council later this year for implementation. This will be another tool in our box to encourage utility companies to get it right, the first time, and actually as quickly as possible, rather than having a week's worth of lights up for a job that only takes 24 hours. On the point that you were mentioning, we were discussing that section of road, and I think we both agreed that the road on the other side of the border was in a worse condition after being reinstated than ours. So I'm pleased that you know when you're entering Surrey because the roads are better than London. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 3, Mr. Essex.
Thank you. In supporting residents who we now expect to travel further to visit some of those that they love in care, might we also consider public transport as an option before opting for taxi vouchers? And in ensuring that we increase support as the demand for the voluntary and community sector to support those people increases, if what we currently provide is not enough, could you reassure me that that will be reviewed, maybe in 3 or 6 months, and if that support is not sufficient, that we will seek that from reserves?
Thank you. Mrs. Mooney.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for your supplementary question. I think you've given some really useful suggestions there, and I will speak to my Cabinet Member with regards to use of public transport. And I would like to provide you reassurance as well that the Adult Social Care Service will review the position with our voluntary sector around transport within 3 to 6 months.
Thank you. Question 4, Mr. Robert Evans again.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the Cabinet Member for her response and for directions towards the Skills for Care website, which I would suggest that all members may like to look at. Is she aware that there are, as she says, 35,000 people employed in this care sector, but a third of whom are non-British and 18% are from the EU, and 8,000 are reaching retirement age within the next few years? What measures has the Council got, or is the Council considering, to address the real challenge that this industry and this sector of the care community will face in the years ahead outside the European Union and with the increased pressure on adult social care? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Mooney.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Evans, for your supplementary question. We are very aware of the pressures around the recruitment and retention of staff, particularly within the care industry, and it is an absolute priority for Surrey County Council and the service in particular to put energy and focus and commitment into that. There are extensive conversations, ongoing conversations that take place with our providers that look at those particular issues, and it's something that's very high on the service agenda. So I would like to provide you with reassurance around that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, question 5, Mr. Essex. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. In light of this reply, which highlights big changes in the levels of funding for public health over the last few years, would you commit to a best practice review to see, what the best level of funding should be spent in public health, benchmarking against what other councils both spend and other councils achieve in this area?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Essex, for your supplementary question. I can confirm that that piece of work is ongoing. The service does review its expenditure in line with other local authorities and is constantly benchmarking. But I will take that back to the service and perhaps provide feedback to you directly offline on that point.
Thank you. Item 7, statement by members on local issues. I have received notice of one statement. Robert Evans is going to make a short personal statement on the recent tragic car accident in his electoral division. You've got 2 minutes, Mr. Evans. No right of reply.
Thank you very much. As colleagues may be aware, on New Year's Eve, there was a dreadful accident on Bedfont Road, Stanwell, in my electoral division. Just before midnight, a white Toyota car was in collision with a large Mercedes HGV owned by Donata, an air services provider. Tragically, 3 people lost their lives at the scene, all British Airways employees. Another was seriously injured, and the lorry driver obviously very shaken and seriously distressed. At this stage, no one is, of course, making judgments nor attributing blame or error to anyone. However, this is a narrow village road, albeit a fairly busy one, being so close to Heathrow Airport. The mix of local cars, cyclists and pedestrians with huge juggernauts, to me, is not a sensible nor a safe one. Nor would it be sensible for the local council Spelthorne to continue to push for yet more warehouses to be built with the inevitable increase in industrial traffic on this suburban road. However, my thoughts today, and I'm sure those of the whole council, must be with all those involved, the bereaved, the injured, their families and their loved ones. Our actions in the future must be to try and do everything we can to lessen, or better still eliminate, the chances of this sort of accident happening again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item 8, original motions. Ladies and gentlemen, although it's presumed that there will be no motions at the budget meeting of the Council, I've received notice of one original motion and I've decided to accept it using my Chairman's discretion. However, in line with Standing Order 11.6, there will be a time limit of 45 minutes for any debate. The motion is for Surrey County Council to agree the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, something particularly close to my heart. This is particularly timely as last Monday some of you were here for our Holocaust Memorial Service, where we commemorated the day and paid our respects to those who suffered so horrifically and needlessly. It is all the more poignant that on the 27th of January 2020, that day marked the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, where some of my family perished. 75 years later, still acts of anti-Semitism are being committed around the world, and sadly I suffered one last week. So it's all still current, ladies and gentlemen. The motion is standing in the name of Mr. Oliver, and Mr. Botton is to be the seconder. So under Standing Order 12.3, Council has to decide if it wishes to debate this motion today. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So, Mr. Oliver, would you care to move the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to put the motion today. I appreciate that it's unusual on the budget meeting to put a motion, but it's not only an appropriate time to do that, it's also the right thing to do. And thank you to Mr. Botton for agreeing to second it. As you say, Chairman, anyone who attended the Holocaust Memorial Day in the Chamber last week can't fail to have been moved by the recollections of Lord Alf Dubs and the survivor Ted Truscott. It was a very, very moving occasion. It may have been 75 years ago that these horrific events took place, and almost the passing of an entire generation. But we cannot and we must not forget the persecution of millions of people for no explanation or justification. But we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that our society has learned the lesson from those atrocities. Sadly, we haven't. We still see all too often across all aspects of society prejudice, denial, blind eyes, justifications, inequalities, a society where we aren't all treated equally or fairly, and a society that in many respects encourages and promotes the survival of the fittest. As a county council, we cannot in truth claim the moral high ground, but what we can do is admit to the issue and do all that we can to drive out behaviour that undermines our individuality, and think twice before we condemn others for their beliefs, their religion, their sexuality, their race or their colour. We must also understand, recognise and address unconscious bias. We are in many respects a homogeneous society, and we should behave like one, a society that tolerates and indeed celebrates its diversity, and a society that must do more to stamp out bigotry and intolerant behaviour. Mr. Chairman, I urge this Council to support the motion.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Botton.
Chairman, it's a privilege to be able to second this motion. I was brought up at a time when casual anti-Semitism was part of everyday language, everyday conversation. This when the Second World War was well remembered by my parents and grandparents, for whom the casual use of language implied their prejudice. They who claimed they wouldn't be prejudiced or couldn't be prejudiced because some of their best friends were Jews. We deceive ourselves if we believe those attitudes are gone. The phrases now used may be in some kind of code, but the inherent issues can be found around us. Sometimes they emerge from the shadows to brandish their hate and remind us they are there. Swastikas on tombstones, fascist posters masquerading as satire, but echoing anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes without shame. Casual Holocaust denial on social media. Sometimes we find organisations and institutions failing to understand the codes, failing to tackle the issue, failing to distinguish a subtext of a speech, an attitude or a position. And sometimes, to their eternal shame, some collude through their silence. Sometimes a cliché sustains itself because it is a truth which cannot be denied. All it takes for evil to prosper is for good people to do nothing. But when you visit Auschwitz-Birkenau, when you visit Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Schindler Factory Museum in Krakow, or Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, you know that doing something is not always enough, that there are not always enough good people, or that good people are not always strong enough, struck down by their own despair. It may be that we can never quite take enough action, never quite be strong enough to put anti-Semitism to death, but we stand a better chance if we continually recognise what it means, reorganise our rage about it around a new stance, or as today, adopt a definition which holds in it an implied resistance, concerted action of us all, members and staff, standing together, continually to say no to anti-Semitism. By adopting this definition today, Chairman, we take a step to ensure our resistance is explicit, that it is unflagging, and that it is angry.
Thank you, Mr. Botton. Mr. Deach.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of Jewish members of the Surrey community, I would like to thank the Leader for proposing this motion and Councillor Botton for seconding. I am from a Jewish family and grew up in a large Jewish community in Manchester. Like you, Mr. Chairman, I am very proud of my Jewish heritage. In the community I grew up, there were many men and women who had survived the Holocaust. They would come and speak at various events at our synagogue, schools and community events. One survivor, Mayor Hirsch, MBE, lived next door to my uncle. He had dedicated his life to Holocaust education by touring schools all over the UK. When out and about in the community, my twin brother and I would regularly bump into Mayor and, like all children with curious minds, would stop and talk. We would ask him endless questions about his experiences and ask to see the tattoo on his arm. One would expect to hear hatred in his voice when referring to his Nazi captors, but it was only later in life that it occurred to me that he never did. In fact, I can't remember ever speaking to any Holocaust survivor who spoke with hatred in their voices. I don't know for sure, but perhaps this is because they know better than any the worst that hatred can lead to. In the latter part of last year, my brother and I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, and saw firsthand the material scene of crime exhibition, which is now in one of the notorious prisoner blocks. Words cannot describe the horror of that place. Mr. Chairman, it is quite astonishing that in 2020 there is even a need to propose such a motion, but there is a need. As a child, I was subject of anti-Semitism. This came from children, so one is hopeful that the children have grown into adults understanding the error of their ways, especially after hearing talks from the likes of Maya Hirsch. However, I have gone through my whole adult life without experiencing any anti-Semitism, that is, until I became politically active in Surrey. This has come from other political opponents and their supporters, both to my face and on social media. Anti-Semitism still exists in Surrey, so I call on all my colleagues in this chamber today to support the motion as proposed. I speak to this motion in memory of my childhood hero, Maya Hirsch MBE, who passed away in 2016. Alav Hashem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain.
Mr. Chairman, humanity continues to be a sacred anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and the international community shares a solemn responsibility to fight those evils. With those words, the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial called on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance plenary session in Budapest in 2015 to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism, which the Council is considering adopting here today. Hate crime in any form is aberrant, and all ethnic minorities in our community must feel safe and assured that this Council will do everything in its power to protect and defend them, their religions and their way of life. The rise of far right and far left politics around the world have seen recent increases in aggressive and violent acts, particularly against the Jewish community, and we must all challenge prejudice and hatred and work together through education towards a better and more tolerant future. I wholeheartedly support this motion and hope the Council adopts the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has been adopted by its 31 member countries, as well as many public organisations in the UK and others with a high public profile. By adopting the IHRA definition, Surrey County Council is setting an example to those around us that we are committed to fighting the evils of anti-Semitism, which will hopefully inspire other councils to take similar action. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Darby.
Thank you, Chairman. The recent Holocaust Memorial Service here in this chamber was hugely moving for me. I learnt an enormous amount, and indeed it was a privilege to be present. I have no hesitation whatsoever in giving my wholehearted support to this motion, and on occasion, less is more, and this is one of them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I first of all congratulate you and all those involved for organising the Holocaust Memorial ceremony that we had in this chamber a few days ago. I would like to support the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, including all of the examples that are provided by the IHIR, all of which don't seem to be included in the motion as it's written. I think it's important that this Council is as robust as possible on this matter. Colleagues, it has been noted extensively in the press recently that the Labour Party, my party, is suffering from an anti-Semitism crisis. Whilst I would argue that it is not quite as presented in the media, it is certainly true that anti-Semitism has become a problem in some wings of the Labour Party. The Labour Party used to be a safe place for Jews, and anti-racism has always been a core tenet, not just of mine, but of most of my members' beliefs. The Labour Jewish movement has been an affiliate of the Labour Party for over 100 years for that very same reason. I think it is important that I take this opportunity to apologise to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the Jewish residents of Surrey for any or all of Labour's failings on anti-Semitism. I hope that when my party elects a new leader, and 2 of the 4 candidates are from Surrey, I hope that he or she, without hesitation, implements the IHRC recommendations. One of the aspects of this debate that I find frustrating is that, as someone who has campaigned for Palestinian rights and a two-state solution all my life, this issue has been hijacked by anti-Semites. I want a viable, independent state of Palestine, but because I'm not an anti-Semite, I also support the existence of a successful state of Israel, safe within its own internationally recognised borders. On a wider aspect, racism, as others have commented on, takes many forms. It claims other non-white groups are inferior and therefore an enemy. You don't have to spend long searching on the internet to find videos from the far right and extreme anti-Zionists detailing conspiracy theories and troops about Jewish bankers or Jews in the media, Jews in America, Britain, and so on, and against many other groups in our society. And finally, I don't want to lose focus on the importance of taking on anti-Semitism today. But if we are really to ensure that no one is left behind, as the leader's motion says, I would gently encourage the leadership to bring forward motions covering the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims, the definition of Islamophobia, and other discrimination definitions as they become available. Colleagues, all forms of racism must be tackled head-on, but I'm pleased today that we are moving the agenda forward to better protect Jewish people in Surrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. My father was part of the first troops to liberate Bergen-Belsen. It was difficult getting him to speak about what he saw. Like many others, I have been to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I have my own views about Auschwitz, but to walk across the fields in Birkenau and stand and listen and feel is humbling, to say the very least. I was fortunate. I went to school in central London. We had a very large Jewish contingency, and there you were taught tolerance and observation and understanding. Through sport, our rugby team on a Wednesday was strong. It wasn't so strong on a Saturday. When you started at school, you were a mere youngster. You couldn't understand why this was. But it was only when it was explained to you, you then understood the strength of people's religion, the views and the support you had to give to them to help them work and be a colleague of yours. Thank you, Chairman.
Three more speakers. Next, Mr. Essex.
Thank you. While I support this definition, my concern is that on its own it highlights Jews as needing to be supported, and I'm concerned that when we look at minorities, we look at all minorities within the country. So we have had an increase in hate crime in the UK since Brexit, and it's important in the UK we protect all minorities, whatever they are. And the same, I think, occurs in Israel. It's not just the Jews who have the right to live there, but others too. So while adopting this definition, what I hope we can do with your permission, Chair, is to look at whether there are other definitions we can adopt also. So in the same way as the African continent has its own Holocaust now, as well as the Jewish ones, in the same way as we must recognise the plight of the Palestinians occupied within what is a country which Jews consider as their homeland. We need to look at those issues together, elsewise we end up picking one side of a fight. And if we want harmony to prevail, we need to bring all people together.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowes.
Sorry, I don't do this often. I grew up in Birmingham. My maiden name was Golding, and I didn't realise it for many years that I was having casual, there was casual anti-Semitism against me, but and you accept it. You learn to accept it, and it really wasn't until my name changed and I became Mrs. Bowes that I realised what had been happening for so many years. And so I totally support this motion. I think we must respect everyone, whatever their faith or creed. Thank you.
And finally, Dr. Grant Duff.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Last week in this very chamber, we did gather for a very moving memorial service on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And more than anything, the reality of the atrocities became vivid in the stories of Lord Doves and Ted Truscoe, and today, Paul's story. But these stories can also, and indeed often are, somewhat our very own stories. In the spring of 1939, a young businessman from Bucharest returned from a business trip to Berlin. His name was Joseph. Like businessmen of his time, Joseph had a good command of the German language. Some things he had seen and heard during his trip had worried him deeply. Turning to his wife, he said, "We must leave at once. There is no time to think about our business or to think about possessions or even our well-being. It is about our lives. We will lose them. Remember, we are Jews." Somewhat the situation did not feel new. Feeling persecution was not new. And like their ancestors had done before, the family packed what they could and said their fond farewells. The children, not understanding very much, were in tears at the thought of leaving their family and friends behind. Everybody had a strong sense of foreboding. They were able to reach Genoa and catch a passenger ship sailing to the Americas, very much uncertain of their final destiny. Reports reached them that, in fact, the next ship to leave Genoa was prevented from actually doing it. After much tribulation, the family reached northwestern Argentina. Joseph set out to rebuild his business and provide for his family. He embraced a new community, a new culture, and mastered yet another new language. But he never spoke of the past. So how do I know the story? Well, the story is as told by my dear mother, Joseph's elder daughter. My grandfather never thought himself lucky. How could he? Overcome as he was to learn of the horrors of the Holocaust. A man of faith, generous and kind, he saw every new day as a blessing and a new opportunity to do what he could for others, without distinction. Mr. Chairman, as I remember my story, I do not want to forget of the untold stories of the millions who perished in gas chambers and concentration camps. It is about our lives. We will lose them. Remember, we are Jews. Those were my grandfather's words, and they became etched in my mother's memory. I believe that in this motion we are called to be truthful in mind and heart and to openly declare our abhorrence of anti-Semitism and our commitment to concerted action. I wholeheartedly support it.
Thank you. Leader, would you care to sum up the debate, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's little that I need to add. I hope that this is not a party political issue in any sense whatsoever. Completely take on board the points around all forms of prejudice and so on. Yesterday, the Cabinet had some training on equality and diversion. Diversity, sorry. It was Dave Hill's fault. Dave Hill sort of talked about diversity, the dance group, and that sort of got rather distracting. But we had some training on equality and diversity. That will be rolled out to all backbench, all members of the council. I would encourage you to attend that. A lot of work is being done across the organisation and as I mentioned in my earlier comments, it's as much about unconscious bias. It's people not realising that they are in some way being or acting in a prejudicial way. So I hope that it's important that we pass this motion today. It's absolutely the right time to do that. But also we must continue with that work to make sure that we do drive out any inequalities and behaviour throughout the organisation.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 9, Corporate Parenting Strategy, page 261. I call Mrs. Lewis, Cabinet Member for Children, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will know, one of the most important items on our member role profile is to fulfil the responsibilities as corporate parents have looked after children, accepting responsibility for children in the Council's care. All Council officers and members share this responsibility, and I'm sure, like me, you're all passionate about doing your best for our children, having high ambitions for them, just as we do for our own children. It was therefore very disappointing for me, and I'm sure for all of you, to read in the Ofsted report of 2018 that the care given to looked after children and care leavers in Surrey fell into the category of requires improvement. Members, particularly those on the Corporate Parenting Board, wanted to do better right away, and we have made a start. I'd like to thank those members of the Corporate Parenting Board who've worked really hard on this, and it was satisfying to read in the recent final report from the Children's Commissioner that corporate parenting is developing well with a strong lead from members. In an ideal world, we would, of course, have started out with a new strategy and worked outwards from there. But there simply wasn't time. We had to do better for our children at pace. So to some extent, the strategy that I'm asking you all to support today reflects work that is already underway under the auspices and leadership of the Corporate Parenting Board. The values and principles in this strategy, which the Children, Families, Lifelong Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee endorsed at its recent meeting, have underpinned what we have done so far and, crucially, will enable us to progress further. Agreeing this strategy would be an important statement from the whole Council that everyone wants to offer good or better services to children in our care and care leavers. That requires improvement is just not good enough. A clear public strategy document helps people all across the Council and key partners to understand the part that they need to play to meet their obligations under the legislation applying corporate parenting principles to looked after children and care leavers 2018, and more particularly to live up to their own public service values. In the Council, it could be a property maintenance team prioritising repairs to children's residential homes. Outside the Council, it reminds our health colleagues, for example, that every child that comes into care has the right to a timely health assessment and that this should be a priority. For members here and in boroughs and districts, parishes and towns, it promotes agreement to support council tax exemption for care leavers, free access to sport, leisure and culture facilities for looked after children and foster families. Equally importantly, it makes clear to children and young people themselves that their corporate parents are making a united effort to bring them up to the best of their ability. And to ensure that children and young people understand the strategy, our Use a Voice team has worked with young people on a shortened version which is accessible to all. So this strategy encapsulates the principles and aspirations of corporate parenting in Surrey. And as the Children and Social Work Act of 2017 states, that as our consciences should dictate even more loudly, we should act in the best interest of these children and young people, keeping them safe, promoting their physical and mental well-being, encouraging them to express their views, wishes and feelings, and taking account of these views. As in all aspects of my role as lead member for children, I couldn't fulfil my responsibilities without a great deal of help. And this strategy will galvanise that help even more so. But through you, Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank, on behalf of all members present, the officers who sit on our Corporate Parenting Board and support our roles as corporate parents. Thanks also to the foster carer and care experience representatives on the board. And last but definitely not least, to my fellow Corporate Parenting Board members, Chris Botten, Claire Curran, Jonathan Essex, Jeff Harris, Julie Isles and Richard Walsh. As you can hear from this carefully alphabetical list, ours is a cross-party board to which each person brings a variety of talents, and this is much appreciated by me as chair. It has been a great sadness to all of us on the board that we have not had a representative of the Residents and Independents Group with us in our improvement work over the past 2 years. We were grateful that Nick Darby, the group leader, joined us at our last meeting, and we hope to see him or another member of the group on a regular basis in future, perhaps inspired by today's debate. There is still a great deal to do to make sure that the care we offer to children in our care and care leavers is as good as it could and should be. But this clear strategy will help us to galvanise everyone to rise to the challenge, and I therefore commend it to the Council and ask you to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. Mrs. Curran.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Mrs. Lewis has read an extract from the report of the Non-Executive Commissioner for Children's Services, who recently published their report in December. But with her usual modesty, she didn't actually read the whole sentence, because that reads, corporate parenting is developing well with a strong lead from members and the chair of the board. And that is Mrs. Lewis herself. And I would like to pay tribute to Mrs. Lewis in the huge work that she has done. The huge work that she has done for children and young people in Surrey, in partnership with Dave Hill, of course. And the work that she has done in galvanising us collectively to think more about our children and young people in our day-to-day council work. I think I'm right, Chairman, in saying that nearly everybody in this chamber is a parent, a grandparent, a step-parent, perhaps at some time a foster parent or an adoptive parent or an as good as a parent. And if you are one of those parents, you know that the children in your care are never far from the front of your thoughts. And so I implore you all, it should be the same for our looked after children. They should never be far from the front of our thoughts as councillors. It is never really that good to summarise what we do for children and young people in rather a dry strategy document. But I would ask you, if you do nothing more, please read the introduction to this strategy and read the words that are highlighted in green throughout it. Please do that. And let us all together we can't be complacent about the work that we have been doing for our looked after children. It may have significantly improved, but it can always be better, just as every parent can be better. And so let's please all come together, support Mrs. Lewis, and do our best for our looked after children and our care leavers.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in fact, Councillor Curran has said a lot of my words, because I very much want to support the chairman of our corporate parenting board. I'm a member of that board, and I encourage councillors. So please encourage them too to think of themselves as corporate parents. I have the privilege of being a parent, and in fact I've graduated to being a grandparent as well. And I would ask you to look at, on the report, page 278, Appendix 2, and there are 10 must-dos for our corporate children, in exactly the same, as I'm sure, when you read it, as parents, those who are doing the same for their children, and even as grandparents were doing. And so our corporate children deserve the same. So please, again, read that page over above the introduction and the report. The final thing I'd just like to say is that when I first joined this council 11 years ago, one of the first things I heard the leader say is, children come first in this council. That was magic to my ears. As far as I'm concerned, that's what this council has done for the last 11 years and must continue to do so. Children come first. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes in this chamber you get the feeling that I just wanted to say that and somebody's already said it. But I'm going to repeat it. Some of the things that you've heard from Mary, from Claire, from Richard, we're all corporate parents Yeah? You don't have to sit on the corporate parenting board to be a corporate parent. We've each got the equivalent of 12 children each, not just the one or two and the grandchildren like some of us have. So we've all got that responsibility. And that goes through officers, that goes through districts and boroughs and partners. If we all join in, it shares the burden. We've got a legal and a moral duty, as you say. And I wonder how many members here know we've got 1,000 children that we look after. 1,000. Yeah. Now, we rely on the corporate parenting board, as you've heard, and I must admit, and I'll echo some of the words you've heard already, I've never been in such a passionate group of people, whatever committee I sit on, whatever group I work with, who are there, who are so passionate, it's tangible. And the efforts that are being made by Dave Hill and his staff to make that difference to our children are tangible. So what I'd like to just remind members, and I did write it down and then kept changing it, is 3 reminders, please. All of us, and I know we've had a lot of papers to read for the meeting, but if you look at a strategy, just go through it, particularly bits in green, which are really relevant to each one of us. All of us need to review what corporate parenting means to us personally. I think we all need to ask, how can we contribute to that passion that's already there for the group that are working with our most vulnerable children? And last year, many of us were able to give £250 towards our celebration fund, which helps celebrate the success of our children, our corporate children. And I would encourage, if that opportunity arises again this year, we dig in our pockets, it's not our money, it's our residents' money, £250, whatever that is, and put it in to celebrate the success of our children. Because ultimately, and if you look on page, I think it's 256, green there, what we're actually saying, ladies and gentlemen, is because if it's our child, would it be good enough? Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support the strategy, and I congratulate Mrs. Lewis on all the work that she's done in this area. I just wanted to pick up a small point in the paper, in the last sentence of the background paragraph. It says, the Select Committee has also agreed to receive a corporate parenting report informing them of the outcomes of children looked after in care leavers. And I think that's really important, because we are, and as we're all corporate parents, can we just know when's it going to receive a report and how often? And wouldn't it be a good opportunity, if that report is being written to the Select Committee, perhaps to circulate it automatically to all of us as we're all corporate parents?
Mr. Botton.
I really want just to associate myself with the words of praise for Mary Lewis's outstanding leadership, which she conducts with all the passion that you have seen on the faces of all of us who share with her the mission on the Corporate Parenting Board. It's a privilege to sit there and hear the work and feel the passion. If anything is the best of us, Chairman, that is the best of us.
Thank you. Mr. Essex.
Thank you. I'll try not to be too echoey in what I say. We're asked to be the best corporate parents on our strategy, not just good corporate parents. And I would urge you to take the letter you've received and share it with all of your borough and district council colleagues who also have the same letter. And think about the commitments we've made, which is here we've made a commitment that those looked after children, those leaving care, do not pay council tax. And that commitment now is supported, or in the process of being supported, by 10 of our 11 borough and districts, albeit one only on trial for a year. What if it was all? What if Surrey as a whole had the same level of commitment? And then in terms of the support facilities, Waverley is now offering free swimming classes and access to its leisure centres, and discounting classes for children in care, for care leavers and for foster families alike. What if there wasn't a postcode lottery in Surrey? What if that same level of support existed across all of our districts and boroughs? And what if we extended it from leisure to the wider arts, and we made sure, just as we would as real parents to our own children, but as parents to looked after children, we were to provide the same opportunities through the Chamber of Commerce and so forth to make sure that work experience and other added extras are made available. So let's do that, but I'd urge you to go back to the districts and boroughs and see if we might all step up to the plate, as Mary has done, and Dave's team has been absolutely fantastic in this regard.
Thank you. Final question from Mr. Darby, and then I'll ask Mrs. Lewis to sum up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In answer to Mary Lewis, I was delighted to attend the Corporate Parenting Board meeting last week. I fully endorse what Jeff has just said. The board has clearly been doing impressive work, and it was fantastic to listen to the infectious enthusiasm of the officers who were present last week. So I would be delighted to continue to attend in the future, and indeed to be a member of the Corporate Parenting Board if that is what is appropriate. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. Really lost for words, but embarrassed and grateful. So thank you very much. Yes, I will really be pleased to take back on your behalf the words that have been said about our officers, because we slimmed down the Corporate Parenting Board from being a massive multi-agency board, and we decided it would just be members, foster carers and a few key officers. And those officers have led us really well into the production of this strategy, but more importantly into the work that's got started. So I will carry back the thanks of everyone, the way that Dave Hill, Tina Benjamin, the Director of Corporate Parenting, and the staff that work with them have done that, particularly our Policy Planning and Projects Manager, who does the practical work of liaising with the districts and boroughs when we get a sniff of something good coming out of them. Jonathan's mentioned a couple of examples where boroughs are doing things, and there are a lot of boroughs doing a lot of things. What we want is something really coordinated so that we can say this is the offer for looked after children and care leavers across Surrey. So we're grateful for everything that everyone's doing, but we're regularly asking them to join in and do more. And the Corporate Parenting Board are very good at all signing, this was suggested by Chris Botten and readily agreed to by everyone else, signing that letter that went out across Surrey to 500 elected councillors. And we've had some great responses from people who want to do a variety of things to help. So that's been a good initiative, which I thank all the members of the Corporate Parenting Board. It is normal practice in councils to have an annual report on corporate parenting. We haven't been doing that in such a detailed way here. What we want to do is incorporate into it a report from the virtual school, a report who look after our children when they're in school, wherever it is. It's not always in Surrey. We want to have a report on foster care. We want to have a report on everything about our children's lives. And it will go to the scrutiny committee, but I would be very happy to circulate it to all members. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, colleagues, the recommendation on page 262 is that the Council is asked to adopt the corporate parenting strategy. Is this agreed? Thank you. Item 10, financial regulations, page 279. I call Mr. Few, Cabinet Member for Finance, to introduce the report. Mr. Few.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the paper sets out, the financial regulations provide a framework within which all staff can carry out their responsibilities in an open and consistent manner. As set out in paragraph 1 of the report, there is a need to revisit the financial regulations in order that these will meet the future needs of the County Council. It notes that the key area of focus is to provide greater clarity on the roles and responsibilities through financial partnership agreements between the Finance Department and the services. These changes were also driven by the need to reflect on the organisation changes that have taken place over the last few years, brought about by the various transformation programmes. The changes are all-encompassing, from capital expenditure, adult social care debt, and other items mentioned in paragraph 6. The full updated financial regulations are set out in Annex A, and the Council is asked to approve the revised regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Few. There's no comments. The recommendation is on page 281 that Council approves the changes in the submitted report and contained in the revised financial regulations. Is this agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 11, appointment of local committee chairman. There's a correction to be made into the recommendation. The date should read 2019-20, and the amended recommendation is included in the supplementary agenda. So the amended recommendation is that Edward Hawkins is duly elected as the chairman of the Surrey Heath Local Committee for the remainder of 2019-20. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 12, report of the Cabinet, page 5 of the supplementary agenda. I call the Leader of the Council to present the report of the meetings of the Cabinet held on 17th December 2019 and 28th January 2020.
Thank you, Chairman. I beg to move the reports of the meeting of Cabinet held on the 17th of December 2019 and the 28th of January 2020.
Thank you, Leader. Council are asked to agree the recommendations as follows. The paragraph A recommendation. The Cabinet recommends that the County Council approves the admission arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools and coordinated schemes for September 2021 as set out in the Cabinet paper from 28th January 2020 as set out on page 5 of the supplementary agenda. Is that agreed? Thank you. Paragraph B. The recommendations have already been approved under item 5 of the financial budget. I trust we are agreed. And paragraph C, the quarterly report on decisions taken under special urgency arrangements, 1st October, 31st December 2019. The recommendation is the Council notes that there has been one urgent decision in this quarter. Are we agreed? Agreed. And item 13, minutes of the Cabinet meetings, page 269 of the agenda and page 11 of the supplementary agenda. No notification of a question on the minutes has been received, so this meeting ends at 12:14. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.